My name is Elle, and I'm a transgender woman talking about eggs cracking, talking about the question, am I transgender? This is the third part of a multi part series asking the question, am I transgender? And I'm going to continue adding to that conversation or monologue. It's really only me talking, but this is essentially me, how I made sense of who I am and my gender identity, essentially. Um, I encourage you to go back and listen to the other parts. I will put links to those previous episodes in the show notes for today. Um, and just as a very brief recap, in the first episode, I talked a lot about how I had all of these different feelings and thoughts and experiences and questions over the course of my life, but that I really needed to look at them collectively as opposed to in isolation in order to kind of make sense of who I am and what my gender is. And then in the second part, we got a little bit more granular. We kind of started to look a little bit more at the details, and I talked about just lifelong preoccupation with trans people and trans experience and stories and etc. And then also feelings of despair about my gender and feeling trapped, and about how those helped inform me of my identity. So for part three, I'm going to continue that. I mentioned in part two about prayers, so I'm going to talk a little bit about my prayers. And then I'm also going to talk about some of my gender-expansive expression. So that's what we'll talk a little bit about today, and then it will continue on. I'll keep bringing this topic back because it seems to connect, and I know that for me, especially when I was in that egg cracking stage, which some of my listeners I know are, sort of making sense of our experience is a hard part. And of course, answering the question about what to do with all this information is another thing, and in some ways is another thing entirely. But this is an important one. So first, prayers. I think I may have talked a little bit about this when I was talking about my feelings of despair. And I think that there were times in my life where I kind of had like this, magical thinking kind of thing where I imagined there was, God as the great big sugar daddy in the sky, or my personal genie. And so, routinely through my childhood and adolescence, when I would blow out a round of candles on my birthday cake, or as I was drifting off to sleep or daydreaming about heaven, I would whisper prayers and ask that I would wake up as a girl. And, I don't really believe in that kind of God, really. I don't know if I've really believed in that kind of God in a long time, but yet I would still, sort of pray those prayers. And even at times when I didn't really fully believe in that God, I would still pray those prayers and fantasize about it. But it's interesting as my faith, kind of maybe matured, or as my faith changed as I went into adulthood, my prayers about gender continued. They changed in nature, but they didn't just stop. And so, like, the subject matter of me praying to God about my gender, like, was still there all along, but I kind of shifted into praying for a transformation of my mind. Instead of praying for transformation of my body, I prayed for kind of as an adherent, as a believer in my kind of fundamentalist Christian worldview in my late teens and early 20s. I believed all of these thoughts and feelings and impulses and, wearing women's clothes and whatever, which we'll get to that in a moment, that they were wrong, that they were evil, and And so I would pray for God to take this away. I went up on just dozens and dozens of altar calls, and I turned in numerous anonymous prayer strips, and I asked for intercessory prayer. I never really told that people, in detail about what the problem was. I did have a therapist that kind of did like sort of conversion type therapy techniques with me when I was an early pastor for a couple of years. And of course, it didn't work. But I still was praying about it. my incongruent gender identity with the gender that goes along with female bodies in general, it just didn't fit for me. And what's funny is that God didn't answer the magical transformation prayer. Like, I didn't just subtly wake up in the morning like a cisgender girl. And at the same time, I also wasn't granted the prayer, like the answer to my prayer of like being content as a man. Like, that never happened, either. And I think later, as I went into adulthood, as I had my kids and I had my family, I started to see my gender dysphoria more as like, my cross to bear, or my thorn in the flesh. Those are both phrases that are from the Bible, that are well known to Christian people. And I thought that, sort of dealing with my gender dysphoria was, I needed to do that. I needed to be content. And so my strategy for prayer led me praying to God, asking for me to help me be content and help me to like just to feel okay being a man. And but I still was praying about it, even in my 30s. And it's interesting. I'm now into my 40s, and it's hard for me to not sort of look back on all those prayers over all those years and to kind of, wonder if God answered those prayers. I wrote this thing. I'm looking at some of my notes here. I wrote this thing. I can't help but believe that if God wished to heal me from transgender ideation and transform my mind, or help me to come to peace with this male identity, that he would have done so 10 times over already. The simplest explanation feels like the most humane. God made me this way, and the path of wholeness lies through the forest of transition. I think that there's a lot of truth to that. I want to read a quote from Julia Serrano from Whipping Girl. And if you haven't read her stuff, she's so smart, so amazing. I'm so indebted to her leadership and work for many, many decades on behalf of trans people, and continually out there, publishing studies and pressing back against exclusionary rhetoric and so on. But she writes in Whipping Girl about this, and she sort of writes about this experience of wishing to get away from it. She writes, the brain hardwiring hypothesis. So she has a brain hardwiring hypothesis where we have like this internal sense of sex that's hardwired in our brain. The brain hardwiring hypothesis can also account for why thinking of myself as a female has always been beyond my conscious reach, why I was unable to repress it or rationalize it away, no matter how hard I tried. A lot of people assume that if trans people have this addict-like obsession with being the other sex, and that the more we think about it, the more we want to convince ourselves into believing it's true. She writes, I have found that being trans is quite literally the opposite. The more I tried to ignore the thoughts of being female, the more persistently they pushed their way back into the forefront of my mind. In that way, they felt more like other subconscious feelings, such as hunger. And I can't agree with that. I can't agree with that more. I tried for so many years to you know, ignore these thoughts. I tried so much to like not have these thoughts, and yet they've been persistent for so many years. And I feel like my prayer life is sort of a record of their presence with me. And you know, today, like I said, I can't help but imagine that God is, you know, answering, answering that prayer. Um, like if I had the opportunity and I could, start, you know, life over again, I don't totally know if I would, but certainly, taking that the matrix pill, you take the blue pill or the red pill. I certainly would take the pill to live the life and have the correct body and gender for myself. Um, One of the questions that sort of leads me to thinking about is, is wishing to be a girl the same thing as actually being a girl? And, I feel like, philosophically speaking, it's kind of a mixed up question. And it's a little bit of a conundrum. um, and in the end, I don't think it's a question that can be really, you know, fully answered in a way. And yet, I also think that it's a question that answers itself. Um, and um, and furthermore, I think that if a person is just stepping back a second and trying to ask the question, am I transgender or not? Merely asking oneself that question on a regular basis, on a repeated basis, repeatedly having those thought patterns come up are, I think, indicative that person probably is not cisgender, at the least. So anyway, so as I think, just kind of in summary, like as I think about my, as I think about my prayer life and over the course of my life, it's yet another sort of reminder of just how significant and important and ever present these thoughts and feelings have been for me. They're not new, and even now, like, when I have a painful day or when I have a difficult moment or when I think about how much, easier it would be to be cisgender, even though I'm not cisgender, but like how much easier it would be to pretend to be a man again. I think about how my dysphoria always comes back. Even if I can get it to like calm, or even if I've been able to get it to calm for some period of weeks or some period of months, it always comes back. And I think it's because it's part of how I'm wired. I think it's part of how I was made. I think it's part of how God made me. And I think that the best possible solution, the best possible way of navigating it is to accept it as reality and to accept it as part of who I am. So there's the kind of, I hope that, I don't know how convoluted that was, but that's kind of the piece on prayers. There's another piece that I wanted to talk about, which is gender expansive expression. And in one of my old notes, I have written cross gender expression, which I think is an unhelpful way of phrasing it. And I actually have had some feedback on that, because it kind of, it sort of leads toward a binary understanding of gender. And even though culturally, in American Western culture, there's mostly a gender binary, we know that gender doesn't exist as a binary, that it's much more of a spectrum or a circle or a graph, a chart, I don't know, but it's not a binary thing. So a gender expansive expression, I was expanding on my gender. It's funny, I have a lot of pictures from childhood one of the activities that I went through in the early part of my egg cracking experience was to go back and look at old pictures of myself. And, I did go through an experience where my family and we lost our home and lost almost everything in it. So there's a lot of pictures that were lost, but I still have a lot of them. And it's funny watching myself in those pictures. There's a lot of pictures from me at ages 6, 7, 8, 9 ish, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, where, it's kind of the mid to late 80s. And I have like the most ridiculous, ostentatious clothing, like bright fluorescent colors. Like there's this one shirt that I have where it was matching shirt and pants, and it was like this fluorescent colored camouflage print where there was fluorescent green and fluorescent yellow and fluorescent pink, and it was in this and then black, and then it was in this camouflage pattern, and it was matching shorts and tank top. And apparently I really loved that. I had long hair for a lot of the time. I had a great big mullet. Some of those pictures have me with a curled mullet. And so I had like some fabulousness going on then. But what's interesting as I think about my presentation, I didn't think of that as being, cross-dressing. I didn't think of it as girls' clothes. I didn't think of it as feminine clothes. And of course, all those clothes were, technically speaking, were boys' clothes. And I wasn't the only one wearing bright stuff. But like, there's a couple birthday pictures of me with my group of friends, and I'm the only one that looks as wild and out there. Like most of the other boys are like, blue jeans and a gray t-shirt kind of thing. And then there was me with this bright bam thing going on, like not terribly conventional. And but at least I don't remember in my mind of thinking of that as being like, I'm dressing this way because I'm a girl, or I'm dressing this way because I want to be a girl, or anything. That I was just being me. And it was around 8 or 9 that I remember dressing up in one of those outfits to go to a concert. I was a big New Kids on the Block fan, which was like this boy band from the 80s. And I had one of those ostentatious outfits with like, bright yellow colors and jewelry and a necklace and the whole thing. And I remember after the concert being back home, and I was sitting in the window crying because I didn't want the concert to be over. And I was like, I was like this starstruck little girl, like, just crying about the show being over and how much I loved it, blah, blah, blah. And I have a very distinct memory of my stepfather coming over, noticing this behavior in me, and just violently, verbal violence, violently, viciously going off at me, yelling at me about how ridiculous I was being and how much of a sissy it was, and demanding that I knock it off, and on and on and on. And, I don't remember it before then, but I remember very much in that moment feeling so ashamed about liking the things that I liked, and wearing what I wore, and liking a boy band that mostly girls liked. And I learned really quick in that moment, and there were probably lots of other moments, but I remember very, very distinctly then that this is not okay, and that if I want to have a place in this family, if I want to have a place in this world, if I want to be safe, if I want to be loved, that I have to get rid of this part of myself. And so anything that felt feminine, anything that felt female, anything that felt related to being a girl, I pressed it away into darkness, and that's where it remained for a lot of decades. And so I really, as I look back on my, gender expansive expression, there wasn't that much of it. And it's because I lived in this culture where I felt, incredibly squelched. And I remember being in my family of origin. I remember hearing lots and lots of comments about, especially about gay people. Like, I mean, in the early mid '80s, nobody knew about trans people, but we knew about gay people, and it was in the middle of the AIDS epidemic, and you had, Ronald Reagan, talking about how we don't need to worry about those people. And a lot of that homophobia I heard in my own home, and condemnation for men that were feminine. A lot less for like lesbian or masculine women, but definitely for feminine men, they were very much condemned in my households. And so any kind of interest that I happened to have that would have been cross or that would have been gender expansive expression, I squirreled it away. I pushed it away. So like, I would have loved to learn how to braid hair. I would have loved to learn I was really interested in jewelry and crafts, and I did like a little bit of that, but not nearly as much. I was very curious about Care Bears or about Disney and Disney princesses and dancing and all this stuff, but I certainly did not feel comfortable verbalizing those wishes. And in fact, I overcompensated in the opposite direction. I tried to show the opposite of interest so that no one would know that I had those interests in the first place. But definitely over the years, I did as much as I could in secret. I mean, even like within a year or two of that shaming event about the concert, I was wearing my mom's clothes when I grew up with a sister who was 8 years younger than me. So I never really fit into her clothes. She was, real little. But anytime I was around other people, other cousins or other friends or whatever who had clothes the same size as me, and that I had a moment that I could try them on, I did a lot of that, and it was all in secret, all very much hidden. I remember, I have distinct memories of, my mom was a seamstress. She was, she edited, she fixed up and made people's dresses, for prom or for weddings and all that kind of stuff. And I remember a few times her coming home with a dress that she needed to alter, and she would, force me to put it on. Like, she would force me to be a model so that she could hem it up at the right height or whatever. And I remember offering my sort of obligatory masculine resistance that would be expected, but in truth, I absolutely loved it. It was like a dream. And I remember this happening 2 or 3 times, possibly more. But I don't really know. It possibly could have happened like as little as once, and it just loomed so large that it is something that I, will never forget. But yet I couldn't verbalize how much I liked it. Once I had a car, I was able to go out and experiment a lot more. I could try on things in stores over the years, but always in secret, and I never would buy anything, and it was always only when I was, traveling or could be anonymous in some way. And one of the complicating things was that I was big, especially in my 30s. I'm 6'1", but in my 30s I was also about 320 pounds. I weighed a lot more than I weigh now, and I actually went through the process of getting bariatric surgery. I had a sleeve gastrectomy and lost a lot of weight. I lost about 80 pounds. I've gained a little bit of back. But I lost a lot of weight, and what I never told anyone was that one of the reasons that I wanted the surgery was so that I could fit into women's clothes. I had this narrative in my head that as long as I'm so big, as long as I'm so heavy, I'll never be able to transition. Now, I didn't think that I would ever really transition. I didn't really ever think that would be possible, but I knew it would be totally impossible as long as I was that heavy. And I never told anyone that. I told everyone that it was for my health, it was for my longevity, it was for my kids, and all those things are true as well. But the pain of not being able to wear women's clothes that fit me was a part of that decision-making process. And so for me, these and many other types of gender expansive expressions, and maybe especially clothing, are, yet another sort of signal to me, another message to me about my gender and about being trans and about who I am. And certainly, like any others of these, if they're, kept in isolation, if they're kept by themselves, if they're reduced to only this thing, then no, it doesn't amount to being trans. But it's when we look at all of these things collectively, when we look at all of them together, it's hard to come up with another, solution. Yeah, I think, for me, like wearing a dress, I know that there's like this debate about gender euphoria on trans Reddit and other trans spaces on the internet. But, for me, it brings a great amount of joy and euphoria to wear clothes that fit me, to wear clothes that I feel good in, that I feel myself in, to wear clothes where I am perceived as and read as a girl when I'm out in the world. It means a lot, and it's not at all something for me. I know for some people it's like a paraphilia or a fetish, or they get turned on by it or whatever. For me, it's not that way at all. It's just how I feel comfortable in the world. And it was such a forbidden thing. It definitely, I remember when I first came out to my wife and I went and bought my very first clothes for myself at Target. It was a very exciting time. It was it was just really amazing to be able to be open and honest and out, and to like not, speaking of editing, to not edit what I wanted, and to not edit what I needed, and to not edit these thoughts or feelings or desires, but just to be real with it. It was transformational. And, if that's not euphoria, I don't know what it is. There's someone who said, the greatest feeling in the world is to be known and to be loved exactly as we are. And, I couldn't agree more. And it's part of what makes transition in a lot of ways so sweet, because I'm able to be honest with what's going on inside of me. And I'm able to self-express in ways that feel comfortable to me. And I have a lot of people, not everyone, but I have a lot of people who love me even given that. And some maybe even love me more because they are able to see who I really am. So there you go. Am I Transgender? Part 3. Prayers and gender expansive expressions. Thanks so much for listening, folks. I would love it if you would be willing to leave a review or a rating for the program, especially I think on Apple Podcasts. I think the majority of folks who are accessing the show are on that platform. But also, I'm on YouTube. This episode will be live on video on YouTube later today. It's a Monday. And we'll continue publishing episodes. We've just passed officially the 6-month mark. Can you believe that? I've been uploading programs once a week for 6 months straight. I think there's 27 or 28 of them now at this point. And just I have no plans to stop now. The YouTube aspect definitely adds an additional layer of work for myself. So, if anything, there may be weeks where I don't do the YouTube piece, but I so appreciate you listening and sending me your messages and comments and questions and so on. The email address is in the show notes, but also you can message me through the YouTube channel or post comments there. But thanks so much for watching and listening and just joining me in this journey. And I hope that you know that you are loved and that there is a place for you to be exactly who you are in this world. So hang in there. My name is Elle, and I am a transgender woman talking.